Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Jenny. I'm from JennyCardDesigns. Thanks so much for stopping by to spend some time with me here today. My YouTube channel contains content that is intended to share paper crafting, tutorials, and inspiration with all of you. I hope that you enjoy. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you some thank you cards using stamp sets that I have in my stash. For the next little bit, I will be using supplies that I have in my craft room already. I have so much stuff that I haven't used yet, and I'd like to really focus on using what I have and shopping in my own craft room. So, without further ado, let's get into today's video. Okay, first up, I'm going to be using the JennyCardDesigns Thankful Greenery stamp set. This was an incentive set from a few months back that I have yet to use. So I'm going to create my first card with this stamp set. So I've got a piece of Neenah Classic Crest Solar White. This is just a quarter sheet of cardstock. And I'm going to pull this stamp out. I'm going to use only this stamp for this card. So I'm just going to lay that on my piece of cardstock, and I'm going to be using my Misty. This is the Mini Misty Stamp Positioner, and I'm just going to load this up into my Misty, put my sentiment where I want it, and I'll use my magnet to pin my cardstock down. And when I'm happy with the placement of my stamp, I will close the door of the Misty and get that stamp picked up onto the door. And I'll just use my fingers and press in to make sure that the stamp is attached to the door, and then checking to make sure it's nice and straight. I'll use the palm of my hand to wipe away any of the manufacturing residue that's left behind on this stamp. And I'm going to grab some heat embossing supplies. I've got an anti-static powder bag, and I'm going to pat that all over my cardstock. And then I'm going to grab some Versamark ink. This is a clear sticky ink. And I'm going to ink up my stamp really good. I'm going to go over it quite a few times because I've never used this stamp before, and I want to make sure I get a good solid impression. I'm going to be doing some ink blending over top of this stamp, so I don't want to miss any spots. So I'll close the door of the Misty and I'll press really good, walking my fingertips over top of the stamp, making sure I don't miss any spots whatsoever. And then I'll open the door of the Misty, and I'm going to reposition my cardstock so that I can re-stamp my image and it land in the same spot. So I'll ink up again with some more Versamark ink and close the door of the Misty and press, making sure I get the good transfer of ink onto the cardstock. And once I'm happy with that, I'm going to take my cardstock and put it over top of my coffee filter. And I've got some JennyCardDesigns Fine Detail White Embossing Powder. This is a really nice fine detail powder. I really like using this one. So I'm going to sprinkle my embossing powder over top of my stamped image, making sure I get good coverage, and tap off any of the excess into my coffee filter. And once I'm happy with that, I'm going to dump all of my powder back into the jar so that once I turn my heat gun on, I don't blow it away all over the place, because I'm sure to do that if I leave it in front of me. So I've got my heat gun. I had this warming up off to the side. I bring it to my paper when it's good and hot. You want to heat emboss your panel fairly quickly. The least amount of time that the gun makes contact with the paper, the better it is for warping. It's always going to warp just a little bit, but when it's good and hot, it embosses a lot faster. So we'll make sure we don't burn the embossing powder either. We want to make sure that we just get it smooth and melted, and then we'll just leave that to cool for a minute. And I'm going to grab a microfiber cloth and a blending brush. This is just a blending brush I have in my stash. I have all kinds of them, and I just wipe it away on my microfiber cloth to make sure that it's nice and clean. And I'm going to use some JennyCardDesigns Ocean Mist ink, and I'm going to ink up my blending brush nice and good, and I'm just going to go over top of my heat embossing, building up some color. You want to go light-handed at first and just build the ink up slowly. It's easier to add ink, and it's impossible to take ink away. So just build up nice and slow. And I'm also using a silicone craft mat just to ink blend over top. I find it's easier to clean up this way. And then I'll use my microfiber cloth and I'll just wipe off any of the ink that may be sitting on top of the embossing powder. Next up, I'm going to use the JennyCardDesigns Master Layouts Die Set 2. This has got a stitched border around it. So I'm just going to grab some washi tape. I'm going to tape this die over top of my panel where I think I want it to be. And then I will run this through my Gemini Junior die cutting machine. which I have off to the side. I love the Gemini Junior. I have some shoulder problems. I have bursitis and some issues from a car accident a few years ago, and my Gemini is my savior. I don't have the strength to crank a manual embossing machine, so this is great. I love having it. So I'm going to pull in some JennyCardDesigns Ocean Mist cardstock. It matches the ink perfectly, and I've also got some JennyCard Ocean Mist envelopes. So I'm going to create a nice Ocean Mist card. Everything's going to coordinate nicely, and it's a really soft and elegant touch. Okay, so I'm going to take the layering die that comes with the Master Layouts die set 2 to create a nice little border around my panel, and I'll get that taped onto my cardstock and run that through my Gemini, and I get a perfect layering panel that will go in behind my stamped panel. And now I also decided that I wanted to cut out one of the smaller sentiments from the Thankful Greenery stamp set. So I just grabbed one of the little flag dies and checked to see which one would fit on the sentiment that I wanted. And those flag dies are also in the Master Layouts die set. And I'm going to cut a piece out of the center of my layer. You won't be able to see it. My card will be glued over top of that, so you won't see that that's missing a piece. And then this way I can be more frugal with my JennyCard cardstock. If you're a Canadian, you know how hard it is to come across here in Canada. So I'm just going to adhere my panel to my Ocean Mist layering panel. And I'm just using a sticky dot runner here. And then you have a perfect Ocean Mist border around this white panel. And I just kind of bend it a little bit to help with some of that warping. And then I'm going to grab a piece of craft foam and I'm just going to eyeball it. I'll cut it out with a pair of scissors. I just want to create some dimension on my card. I'll cut out a panel and then I'll adhere that in behind. I like the way that my cards feel with craft foam in behind the panels. It just gives it a nice, thick, substantial feeling. Just feels like quality when you hold it in your hand. With nice cardstock and thickness and dimension, it just brings a stepped up level to your card. Okay, so that's looking good so far. Next up, I'm going to take a half sheet of cardstock and I'm going to use my score buddy and I'm going to score it at 4 1/4 to make a US A2 size card that measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So I'll get a nice deep score in that cardstock. And then I will fold it and I will grab my Teflon bone folder and really press that fold in to get a nice sharp crease on our card. I like heavyweight cardstock and sharp crease corners on my cards. It just makes the card feel extra special. I don't know what it is. Okay, so I'm going to adhere this panel down to the front of my card and get that right in the center. I really like that white border, that space around. It really draws your eye into the center of this card. I really like it, so pretty. Okay, I'm going to stamp the sentiment on this little flag and I will ink that up with my Versamark ink. I'm going to heat emboss this again. So I want to make sure that this is inked up nice and good, and then I will stamp that onto my little flag and then sprinkle my embossing powder over top. And you know the drill. We're going to sprinkle the powder, tap off the excess, use my heat gun to melt all of this powder until it's smooth and melted. And then I'm going to pop this up onto the front of my card. I use my reverse tweezers to help hold that little banner to make sure I don't burn my fingers. I'm going to grab the leftover piece of craft foam that I have and trim off a little strip to put behind my banner. Adhere that to my banner and then adhere this to my card front just underneath that thank you. So we have a nice sentiment that reads thank you for being a friend. Okay, and I'm going to grab some sequins and just embellish this a little bit. I've got some liquid glue and I'm just going to squeeze out 3 little dots of adhesive where I think my sequins will look nice. And then I'm going to use my tweezers. I have a jewel picker somewhere, but I can't find it. So I'm just going to use my tweezers and pick up a few clear sequins and then pop those onto the front of my card where I've got my glue. And then that's going to be it. Clean and simple, nothing too complicated with this card. But I think it's a really soft and elegant looking card. I love the color combination. Okay, and then this coordinates very nicely with the ocean mist envelope. Looks good. Okay, this card is complete. Here's a close-up look at our finished card project. Quick and simple. This is easy to mass produce, and it looks really nice. Okay, let's move along to card project number 2. Okay, for my second card, I'm going to use this large stamp from JennyCardDesigns. This is the Tall Pines stamp. This line of trees will take up an entire card front. This is also something that came out last year and I ordered and I never used it. So it's been sitting in my craft room for a year, brand new, and this is the first time I'm using it. I'm sure many of you can relate. Okay, so what I've done is I've loaded up this stamp and a piece of Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock into my Mini Misty, and I'm wiping away the manufacturing residue. I'm getting the stamp ready to take some ink. I'm going to heat emboss again. So I'm using an anti-static powder bag and some Versamark ink. I'm going to ink up my stamp really good to make sure I get a good impression. Close the door of the Misty, put some good pressure and press down, and I'm going to do this twice to make sure that I get a good transfer of ink. I'm happy with that, and I'm going to clean up my stamp and put it away. Lots of times I like to clean as I go when I'm crafting so that I don't end up with a big mess. I always end up with a mess anyways, but I think it would be worse if I didn't clean as I sort of moved along. Alright, so I'm going to put this stamp set away, and then we're going to heat emboss that panel. I'm going to pull in some JennyCardDesigns Fine Detail White Embossing Powder and my coffee filter, and sprinkle my powder over, and my heat gun is heating up off to the side there, and when it's good and hot, I'll bring it to my paper and melt all of this embossing powder. I find this is the easiest way for me to apply embossing powder. I know lots of crafters use containers and things like that, but I'd find that I end up with a bunch of mess inside of my little container of embossing powder, so I like to do it this way. Okay, so once my panel is fully embossed, I'm just going to bend it back and forth a little bit to get rid of some of that warping. And now I pulled in my silicone craft mat again, and a blender brush and a microfiber cloth, and I'm going to use some JennyK Lucky Clover ink, and I'm going to ink up my blending brush. I will softly apply some ink in a circular motion, building up that ink around my trees, and then use my microfiber cloth to wipe off any excess. This card is very similar to the first one in terms of technique. I'm doing the same sort of thing. I'm just creating a landscape card instead, and then I'm going to step it up a little bit more. So I'm just going to clean off my brush and put that away. Sometimes I find if you don't kind of clean off your brush, it'll harden as it sits, and you don't want that. Alright, so JennyCardDesigns Master Layouts die set 2 again. I'm going to use that stitched panel to cut out my trees, and then I'll use the next layer to cut out a green panel. So I'll run this through my die cutting machine. I like the way that looks. I like this sort of fade off into white. Okay, now I'm going to grab some JennyCardDesigns Lucky Clover cardstock and a coordinating envelope. So I'll get everything put back away, and I'm going to take this panel, I'm going to cut out my layering piece. I'm going to use the scallop oval die that's from the JennyCardDesigns Master Layouts die set 1. So I'll get that cut out of the center of this panel. I'll cut them out both at the same time to save me some time, and I'll save this piece of cardstock, and that little scallop oval comes out really easily. And this panel layers perfectly, and behind looks great. You won't even know I cut a circle out of there. Okay, next up we're going to work on the sentiment. I'm going to use the JennyCardDesigns Fancy Greetings stamp set, and I'm going to use the Thank You So Very Much stamp, and I'm going to ink that up with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. This is a pigment ink. It's nice and dark black, and because it's a pigment ink, it stays wet a little bit longer, and I'll be able to emboss it. So I ink up my stamp nice and good, close the door of the Misty, stamp my image down, and now I'm going to pull in some clear embossing powder. I want to give this greeting a little bit of a shine. So I'll sprinkle my clear embossing powder over top of my greeting, And then I'm going to heat set this until it's smooth and melted. And that looks nice and shiny and glossy. It'll be a nice focal point against that green. Okay, now I'm going to use the oval die from the Master Layouts die set 1 that layers with the scallop oval. So I'm going to use that, and I'm going to cut out my greeting. I'll run this through my Gemini Junior. Okay, so now we've got a bunch of pieces and a piece of cardstock. I'm going to score this piece of cardstock at 4 1/4 to make a US A2 size card once again. And I'll use my Teflon bone folder to crease my fold. So make a nice sharp crease with no marks on that cardstock. And as I mentioned, I'm creating a landscape card this time. And we'll start adhering our pieces. I will adhere this panel to the green layer, and I'm just using my sticky dot runner for that. I love the Master Layouts die set. I think this is a staple for any craft room. If you're going to get dies, then I would suggest getting these 3 sets of dies because they're so versatile. And I mean, you can do a ton of different things, all different sort of layouts and shapes and sizes. So I'm going to adhere my ovals together, and then I'll grab a little piece of extra craft foam just to pop up my sentiment, and I'll just trim that out and adhere that down, and then get this adhered to the front of my card. I decided to use a little bit of liquid glue. My tape wasn't sticking to that foam, so I used my liquid adhesive, and then I will place that in the center of my card. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, if I wanted it off to the left, to the right, and to the center, and then I settled on the center. So that looks good. And I got a little bit of adhesive where I didn't want it, so I'll just wipe that away. And then I'm going to use the grid lines on my craft mat to sort of line up my card to make sure that I got my oval right in the center. Because I don't want it to dry and then it be kind of off-centered and look weird. Okay, looks good. So here's a close-up look at our finished Lucky Clover Thank You So Much card. I think that green is really pretty. Very masculine too. You can use this for a masculine thank you card. Okay, so that's it for card project number 2. Let's move along to card project number 3. Okay, for my third and final card project for this video, I'm going to be using the JennyCardDesigns Seasons Greetings stamp and die set. I'm not making a Christmas card, but I am making a sort of winter themed thank you card. So I'm going to grab these 2 hot cocoa mugs and the coordinating die that goes along with it. And I'm just going to pull those things out. And I'm kind of going in a little bit of backwards order this time. I'm going to start with my die cutting. I'm pulling out a plum punch envelope and coordinating cardstock. And I'm going to die cut a panel using the Master Layouts die set 2, using that stitched panel and the layering panel. So I'm going to cut out a piece of white cardstock using the stitched panel and a piece of plum punch cardstock with the layering panel. And then I'm also going to line up those 2 hot cocoa mugs in the center of this panel to get a outline image cut out. And then I'm going to use this embossing folder from Simon Says Stamp. This is the Snowflake Oval Frame die. And I'm going to take that stitched panel and line it up in the center of this embossing folder. And then I'll emboss that. You get a little bit of subtle detail on this white piece of cardstock. I just wanted the texture of the snowflakes. And then I'm going to adhere this down to my plum punch panel. And I'll just sort of bend this a little bit to help with some of that warping. This is a 3D embossing folder, so you can get some pretty deep etching, and sometimes it can warp. So I'm just going to sort of work my cardstock back into its natural shape. And then I'm going to adhere everything together. I'm going to take this panel and glue it to a piece of craft foam. And then I'm going to adhere this to my card base. I've got a half sheet of cardstock, and I score that at 4 1/4 to create an A2 size card once again. This is also a landscape card, and I'm using some liquid glue. I grabbed this Simon Says Stamp Craft Tacky Glue. I find that this glue takes a little bit longer to dry than the JennyCardDesigns Connect glue or the Lawn Fawn glue tube. So I prefer the other two over this one, but this is all I had sort of in reach at that time. So I just adhered this down, and then I'm going to take my MISTI and set it over top of this card so that the glue can have a chance to adhere to the paper. I grabbed a candle to add a little bit of extra weight to that too. Okay, and now let's move along to stamping. I'm going to take the 2 hot cocoa mugs and the outline die cut, and I'm going to tape that into my MISTI and then line up that stamp as best as I can and then get it picked up with the door of the MISTI. I use my anti-static powder bag and Versamark ink. I'm going to heat emboss this. So I'll ink this up with my Versamark, close the door of the MISTI and stamp, and then pick up this die cut without sort of bending it or breaking it. And I'll lay it in my coffee filter and sprinkle JennyCardDesigns Gold Fine Detail Embossing Powder over top of these coffee mugs. And when I'm happy with that, I will grab some tweezers to hang on to these coffee mugs so that I can heat set the embossing powder until it's smooth and melted. Now there are some little delicate snowflakes on these coffee mugs, and it's hard to sort of see on camera. At the end of the video, you'll see a photo and you'll see a really good shot of those snowflakes, but it's kind of hard to see here. So I just sort of heat set this until it's smooth and melted, and then I'm going to adhere this down to my card base, which by now is good and adhered together. Then I'm going to pull out this Thanks die cut. This is from Simon Says Stamp. I'm going to cut this out of the Gina K Plum Punch cardstock 3 times. I'm going to cut it out, glue it together, and stack it up on top of my card for some dimension. And that's it. As I sort of tilt it in the light, you can see that subtle snowflake pattern on those mugs. Here's a close-up look at our finished card project, and there's a better shot of those snowflakes. Super cute. Okay, that is it for today's video. Here is a look at all 3 cards that we made here today. The Ocean Mist card and envelope, and the Lucky Clover card and envelope, and the Plum Punch card and envelope. And that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend it here with me. I appreciate all of the support. If you like this video, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Coming up on screen are a few videos I think you may enjoy. Have yourself a lovely day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!